Let's go, gang. Let's be working out here. No penalties in that center ice zone. No extra holds out there.
It was a team of rebels in an outlaw league. The Minnesota Fighting Saints were charter members of the World Hockey Association, an organization that began play in 1972 as an in-your-face challenge to the pro hockey establishment. Based in downtown St. Paul, the Saints were a unique collection of characters, colorful and sometimes cartoonish, with a blend of talent and toughness that became an entertaining alternative to the crosstown Minnesota North Stars.
Their team was really bad. It was slow, and it was not very good at that time. So they had a terrible time in the NHL. Well, the Saints were rollicking, freewheeling, totally entertaining. They might win, they might lose, and you might not care.
For parts of 5 seasons, the Fighting Saints were the capital city's professional hockey team, the pride of St. Paul, and they won more than they lost. But their story isn't just a tale of victories and defeats. It's a real-life saga of sweat and blood, of camaraderie and red ink, and a sporting chapter that can't be forgotten.
It's just mayhem on the ice.
If everybody, I think, that has anything to do with hockey or likes hockey has seen the Slapshot movie, well, we've lived that.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hey now, how's it going, everybody? My name is Tim Hanlon. It is Good Seats Still Available. It is the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in the realm of professional sports. Thanks for coming by and downloading us, putting us in your earbuds. We appreciate you doing so this week. Fun and frivolity. We're back into the World Hockey Association. This week's guest tells us all about the fascinating story of the Minnesota Fighting Saints. His name is Dan Whenesota. Is that his real name? I'll never tell. But the Minnesota Fighting Saints, almost if you could encapsulate the entire history of the World Hockey Association, which I know is a challenging thing to do in its own right. But if you wanted to pick a really good, not completely, but a really decent representative club, and it really was actually 2 clubs, we'll get into our conversation. The Minnesota Fighting Saints were probably emblematic of this crazy league for a whole host of reasons. They were a hell of a lot of fun to watch. They were in St. Paul at the time when the still fledgling Minnesota North Stars were holding ground in Minneapolis proper and then in the suburbs of Bloomington. They were slow. They weren't such a great team, as you heard in that clip there from an old clip from a documentary from the old FSN, Fox Sports Network North. I don't know when it ran. We tried diligently to find out, but we couldn't. But that was the setup for that documentary. It's online. It's on YouTube. The Fighting Saints were quite the alternative. And around the time that the WHA was coming online, 1972, the debut season, the Fighting Saints were there as part of that debut in the St. Paul Auditorium in 1972, and then the St. Paul Civic Center from 73 to 77. And as our guest this week, Dan Whenesota, will tell us, just a thrill ride of all kinds of shenanigans through its first iteration, the Fighting Saints, from 72 through, I would say, the midpoint of the 75-76 season or so, when they flat out ran out of gas, which was not uncommon in WHA times, for sure. And then, incredibly, a return of a brand new franchise, they being the former Cleveland Crusaders of the WHA, which bolted out of town in 76 when, as we know from our episode number 225 with our great guest Gary Webster, the Cleveland Barons were coming to town as a relocated NHL franchise, that being the California Golden Seals. So the reemergence, if you will, of the Minnesota Fighting Saints, they took on, this is sort of a mini retcon, retroactive continuity situation, but it was really a second franchise. But adopting the name of the original team that had left in the midpoint of the prior season in 1976, and itself the second franchise, the former Cleveland WHA franchise, only lasting a half season in and of itself. Different color schemes, but the same logos and Fighting Saints names and all that kind of stuff. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So much to talk about this crazy team and a half known as the Minnesota Fighting Saints. And we're digging in as we try to chip away and comprehensively in this week in the WHA. So many stories from that. If you know the movie Slapshot, this is an episode for you. If you remember the brawl at the ball between the Whalers and the Minnesota Fighting Saints from, when was it, April 11th, 1975? There's no video of it, but the audio is classic for you hockey fans out there. It was the Hartford Whalers, or the New England Whalers, I forget what they were known as at that point, in Hartford, is the only sort of, I think, existing audio or video of that. This is an episode for you. If you remember the Cleveland Barons or the Cleveland Crusaders or have any interest in Minnesota hockey generally, this is the episode for you. It's our conversation with Dan Whenesota. He, the author of the brand new book, come out just a couple weeks ago, called A Slapshot in Time, The Wild But True History of the Minnesota Fighting Saints. He's here to talk to us all about them and it, coming right up, right after this promotional message. Buckle up for safety. It's a doozy of a memory for sure. How about two great sponsors this week to celebrate the memory of the Minnesota Fighting Saints? Let's start first with oldschoolshirts.com. Our pal P.F. Wilson and friends in Cincinnati has that's oldschoolshirts.com, of course. The three great shirts, count them, that commemorate the 1.5 versions, if you will, the Minnesota Fighting Saints. There are two great shirts celebrating that first incarnation, a gray shirt with the sort of blue and yellow Fighting Saints logo, one of the best logos ever in forgotten sports history for sure. And then a sister shirt that has this gorgeous yellow S with the word Saints on it. That's the first iteration of the team. And the second iteration of the team, the 1976 version, is the same Minnesota Saints, Fighting Saints sort of baby-like logo, angel-like logo, but in their new color scheme of that year, yellow and red. Check them out all at oldschoolshirts.com. And that's not just, there's tons of WHA shirts writ large there for you, and other leagues and teams and sports and cities and memories. It's a collection that keeps on growing. And of course, we've got a promo code for you there. It's Good Seats at oldschoolshirts.com. Good Seats is the promo code, 10% off all of your purchases. And then once you're done there, head on over to our other pals at royalretros.com, the king of throwbacks. Not only will you find a really great Fighting Saints shirt, actually two different versions of those, of the first iteration. There's a yellow shirt with the blue highlights and vice versa, a blue shirt with the yellow highlights, again, commemorating that first year's team's color scheme. But there's also the opportunity to get a gorgeous custom-made, put your number on it, your name on it, whatever you want, Fighting Saints jersey. And yes, two different versions available for you at royalretros.com. There's the blue with the yellow trim and that original color scheme and logo, or you can get it in red with the yellow and white trim, which commemorates that half year of the second version. Fantastic stuff. If you're a Minnesota hockey fan, you grew up in Minnesota, you just want to amaze and delight your friends, why don't you head on over to royalretros.com and get yourself one or maybe both of these Fighting Saints jerseys. And now as I move my cursor around, I believe you can actually get those in white and yellow as well. So there are four colors. The main colors of these Fighting Saints is home and away jerseys, one of which is that red and gold version of the 1976 half-year version. All of them available for you in tons of different sizes and whatever you want to put. You want to put a Captain C on there. You want to put an alternate Captain A on there. You want to put your name on there, your number, or leave it blank for God's sakes. They're all custom made and they're highest quality for you at, what is it? Well, come on. Well, you know, it's royalretros.com. And again, promo code for you there is just plain old seats. Seats, the promo code there for you, 10% off all of your purchases at royalretros.com. Thank you both, royalretros.com and oldschoolshirts.com. And thank you for trying them out. We appreciate it. I know you're going to love them, whatever you get from them. And I know you're going to love this conversation. Coming up, here it is. Dan Whenesota. Let's talk about those Fighting Saints. Here we go. Please, as always, enjoy.
This whole bit for me started with the Believe Land documentary. If you've ever seen the Believe Land documentary, ESPN
Yes.
30, they talk, they chronicle Cleveland's all their heartbreaking moments, and they have the shot, the catch, the drive, and they have them like labeled, and each one of those events. Like, for example, they say the trade. Well, the trade was the Cleveland losing Rocky Colavito. Well, Minnesota also has a famous trade, the Herschel Walker trade. And then they talk about the drive where Ernest Biner fumbles on the goal line, the fumble. That same day, Darren Nelson fumbled on the goal line for the Vikings in the NFC Championship. So I'm watching this documentary. And every one of these events, I'm like, oh yeah, I got one better, right? And then to me, the icing on the cake was they talk about how the evil owner, Ted Stepien of the Cleveland Cavaliers, had traded away all their draft picks. And these hero owners came in to save the Cavaliers, and that's the Gunn brothers, George and Gordon Gunn. And the picture they use in the film is the guns in front of a North Stars flag. Those are the two owners that tried to move my North Stars to San Jose. And I'm like, how dare you? So that was like the thing that really set me off. So I was like, I need to write a rebuttal to this director, this Andy Billman. I need to write a letter to him. So I started crafting this thing about all my arguments why Minnesota is more tortured than Cleveland fans are. And it turned into this little mini mockumentary I titled Whenesota, because Believe Land, Whenesota, when's it going to be our turn? And we had this little showing of it in the garage and invited family over and had popcorn. And I had little, cups made, little souvenir cups and everything, and just kind of went through all Minnesota's worst sports moments in this film. And that turned into the calendar of Calamity, because a friend of mine encouraged me to start writing again. So I started creating this calendar of Calamity that caught the attention of our local sports station here, KFan, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they started using the daily calendar, Calamity calendar, which is why the people always email me and say, hey, why don't you say anything positive about the Twins? And then one day I got an offer to do a book about the calendar, and that turned into the first book, which was History of Heartbreak. But that's kind of what started it all.
So obvious to say, you're a Minnesota guy, I guess, and a native at that, right?
Yep. Born and raised. I have a few years I spent in Fargo for college. But yeah.
And I'm guessing you would consider yourself then a long-suffering Minnesota sports fan. I mean, like, how far back does this go? At the age
as far as I can remember, I remember growing up, and the Twins were just terrible in the early 80s. And my parents talking about the Vikings being the first team to lose 4 Super Bowls. So yeah, we've got a lot of in what's the word I'm looking for, in our genes, just this okay. Here's a perfect example. I just mentioned, Fargo. I went to NDSU, and I got to NDSU. I was like, whoa, the football team here wins. I didn't know what to do with that, right? It was like, oh my God, right? Like, I've been to some NDSU football games where the team gets down in the last minute, nobody leaves. In Minnesota, everybody leaves because we know it's over, And in NDSU, the fans know we're going to come back, and they do. Here we go. This is over there. Or you get that feeling that you're like, oh my God, here it comes. We're going to blow this. And it's like, it's a physical feeling. And it's like I said, it's in our genes, I think.
And why is that? Is it because the pro sports thing really took a fairly long time to kind of, I guess, circle around the Minneapolis, St. Paul area and domicile, all the major sports and that kind of stuff? I mean, obviously was always at the top of the list in the 60s in baseball for expansion. And, hockey took forever to expand. And, Minnesota had to wait until 67 of the great expansion of the NHL waking up.
Yeah, 67 was NHL. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, but most of those, certainly the Timberwolves didn't come till a long time, a long time even after that. Is it because, what is it? Is it an inferiority complex? We're not good enough. We're a major metropolitan area, but people don't give us enough credit. Why do you think that sort of is?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think, first of all, it's just experience. It's happened so many times. I mean, if you're dating a girl and she keeps cheating on you and says she's not going to do it again, I mean, how often do you believe it, right? I mean, very rarely does it happen. Like that Minneapolis Miracle, we all thought that was over, right? I mean, how does that happen? So, I mean, and even the next week after that Stephon Diggs touchdown, I mean, I'm like, oh my God, like death is coming looking for us. We escaped it. Like I could not focus on the Philadelphia NFC Championship game. I was so anxious and so worked up because we had escaped death the few weeks or the week before. But yeah, I mean, I think Minnesota has like a little bit of an, one of my favorite radio hosts calls it flyover country. We're not as important as the other coasts or the second city kind of a mentality. I mean, not that we're not, but we have that kind of one of us thing, and we're very proud of who we are in Minnesota, and like they're from Minnesota, they're one of us, but when it comes to sports, we're definitely flyover country, I think.
All right. Well, then tell me how, in particular, the Fighting Saints, both versions, by the way, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
And the World Hockey Association sort of hits your radar as something to delve into and get more schooled on or to a story to unearth, right? Because I think, the Minnesota North Stars, we've had a couple of conversations about them, including people like Howard Baldwin, who were part of the ownership group, and the sort of the menage a trois, if you will, between the Penguins and the San Jose expansion thing and the Guns and Minnesota and then moving to Dallas and all those kinds of shenanigans and stuff. There's a fascinating sort of web of that. But this is a team that I think anybody who's a hockey fan would probably say, oh yeah, I remember the North Star, Dino Ciccarelli. Yeah, I remember all that. Sure. But then when you go deeper into this Fighting Saints thing, you'll get a completely quizzical look. And that might even be among people who even know what the WHA was. So what's your story?
Well, so during the pandemic, we were all looking for, media to consume and watch, and during all the lockdowns, and somebody turned me on to this California Golden Seals documentary. And obviously you can tell I love documentaries. That's one of my favorite things to watch. But
are you referring to the Mark Gretschmill film?
I think so. Yeah, it was on Apple iTunes or whatever.
Yes, it was. And just so you know, a little historical note: Mark Gretschmill was our very first guest way back when, 5+ years ago. So he was the excuse and the reason and the way we got going. So our apologies.
Well, it's a brilliant documentary. It's brilliant. And as you know, the California Seals came into the league at the same year as the North Stars did when they expanded. And so I'm kind of watching this, and I aspire to be maybe a sports documentarian someday. So my little amateur films that I have on YouTube, I kind of thought, why is there no North Stars documentary? I mean, it's a really great story, and I just thought, you know what? Why don't I do that? I'm sitting here in a lockdown in a pandemic, and why don't I do that? So I started using my kind of normal research and things. I mean, I don't have access to a lot of video or interviews or anything like that, but I started to create just kind of my own little amateur North Stars documentary. It's called The North Star State. And I kind of divided it up into 4 parts. The first part is, it's called A Star is Born. And it's about the origins of the franchise and the building and constructing of Met Center. And, and kind of interestingly, part of the Fighting Saints story here is when the North Stars, when they got their franchise, they kind of had 2 factions in their kind of organizational group. They had a Minneapolis group and a St. Paul group. And this, for Minnesotans, has always been kind of a little argument about, Minneapolis being the first city and St. Paul kind of being overlooked a little bit. And at first they were looking for an arena. They needed to have an arena that was 13,000 seats, and Minnesota didn't have one of those. So they would either have to build one or they would have to expand a current one. And the one of the goals was, or one of the first plans was, they were going to expand the St. Paul Auditorium. Well, right before the Board of Governors meeting, they realized that that would have to be approved by a public vote, and that wouldn't be known for another few months, and well after this meeting with the Board of Governors. So they decided to go with the plans to build a new stadium, Met Center, at the Bloomington site next to the baseball stadium. And that kind of ticked off the St. Paul faction. And they decided to kind of, well, we're going to go present our own plan to the NHL Board of Governors. And this was like a few days before the NHL Board of Governors meeting. And they kind of realized, divided, they stood less of a chance to get a franchise. So they kind of kissed and made up and said, all right, we'll go in there with the plans to, have the St. Paul Auditorium as our site. And when they went into the meeting with the Board of Governors weren't having it. They were bored with it. And they're like, listen, we need a new stadium. We want to have you guys in a new arena. So they took a recess, went out and talked it over, and came back in with the plans to get the Met Center to go with those plans in Bloomington instead of St. Paul. And the NHL awarded the North Stars the franchise. And so St. Paul kind of got closed over a little bit there. Well, 3 months into the North Stars season, St. Paul decided to approve plans for an arena, an 18,000 seat facility, which would become the Civic Center. And anyways, that's all in the first part of that film. And so the second part of the film was called Saints, Seals, and Barons, because you can't tell the story of the Minnesota North Stars in the 70s without addressing the WHA and the competition for players and the competition for fans here in Minnesota, where they had two different teams and two different choices. And that's kind of where I got into this. And as I'm going through this history, I'm just reading all these wild and crazy stories and these newspaper articles. And I'm just like, why? And I Google things, and you're looking, there's plenty of North Stars books out there. There's no books about the Fighting Saints. It's kind of lost history. And I'm like, these guys need their own story. So that's kind of where this book, I wasn't sure at first if I was going to do it as like its own little mini documentary, but it kind of turned into a book.
So this in your mind, this is more a missing plank in the floorboard of Minnesota, at least professional hockey, but maybe professional sports, to fill in sort of those gaps that Minnesota sports fans and maybe even others by tangent, right, need to know about, right? And you're mentioning one of those, right? So one of our most popular episodes thus far in our 5 years happened just about, I don't want to say about 6 months ago, was talking about the Cleveland Barons, right? And I think you're sort of hinting, I know we're getting a little ahead of the story there, but without understanding that Cleveland Barons story, right?
Because that's the Seal story, and
Seal story, and then obviously what the second version of this team. So okay, so I sort of get the sort of the setup here. So, and Gary Webster, by the way, is the person we had that conversation with. So our listeners can stop what they're doing right now and search up that episode, and then come back to this one when you're ready. All right, so give me a sense then as to how you approach this story. Right, it's the early 1970s. We had the late, great Dennis Murphy on this show before he passed away last year, talking about his recollections about the WHA. I've had a lot of people who've, had some experiences there. And all of them seem to kind of circle around sort of a thread of sell franchises first, figure out the hockey thing and everything else later. Is that the same? Is that true? Is that sort of that belief set sort of hold for the Fighting Saints?
I think so.
How did you approach the story to begin with?
Well, I think so. I asked, I spoke with the PR director for the Fighting Saints, Mike Lamy, and just kind of like, I said, what was the Fighting Saints legacy? He said one word: chaos. I mean, just they were kind of learning as they went, and kind of like you said, just get the franchises first, and everything else will fall into place. I just approached it from a timeline kind of perspective, like from the beginning to the end, and kind of just chronicled it that way, and just told the stories along the way, season by season, and the playoffs, and then kind of like, you know, an epilogue at the end, like here's what happened to everybody. So pretty linear, I guess, is the way it was set up.
But so walk me through then how you sort of reconstruct this story and get into it, even the source material. I mean, it seems like you had somebody who was still around who had actual firsthand knowledge, and those are always the most golden, shall we say, of sources, right? But what did you think you knew about this team going in, and how did you start chipping away at it? What was the process that you know, you got going to do so? Was it microfiche? Was it video? Was it just the recollections of this former press person, or what?
Well, for me, my little bit that I do on Twitter is all about newspaper articles. And so I just bury my face in old newspaper articles and you know, kind of write about the stories that happened. And I was -1 in 1972. So I don't remember, I knew they existed. So to me, this was all brand new reading these stories. I didn't talk to the people about the stories until afterwards. So like, I pretty much had the whole story from reading all the newspaper articles, and kind of knew the timeline before I went to, you know, I also spoke with Lefty Curran, who was the first person to sign in the history of the league. And so when I went to talk with these people, I pretty much knew the stories. They gave me a few things I didn't kind of know, but more or less it was them kind of just confirming my story. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so I do have this right. And I do have this right. And listening to them tell it in their own words was quite a bit of fun as well.
And Lefty wrote the forward to the book too. So that's saying something too, because if he's the first guy in the league and he's forwarding your book, it's obviously, it has some meaning for him too. But so 1972, right, when the WHA launches in earnest, the Fighting Saints are indeed one of those original launch teams. And to me, it's kind of a curious selection, not in that Minnesota and the state, of course, and the region and the two cities, of course, too, hockey hotbed, right? Had, you know, for some time, and I guess, you know, overdue in 1967 to be awarded an actual professional franchise by the late to expand NHL. But I guess we're talking about only 5 years in, right? Now, all of a sudden, there's a competing team in a, shall we say, competing or at least sister city. And all of a sudden you go from one, you know, within the span of 5 years, you're going from 0 professional hockey franchises to 2.
Yeah.
Is that curious in that time, or is it just like, of course, Minnesota should have an expansion or a startup WHA franchise?
Well, I think at first, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think at first the WHA, it seemed like some of the franchises were in cities, like they had the Philadelphia team and they had the New York team, and they seemed to be trying to target cities where they could draw away from the already established NHL. Whereas in the end, you know, of when it all started to collapse, it seems like they didn't want those teams. Like you probably know this, they let the Cleveland Crusaders, or they bailed out the Cleveland Crusaders with a loan while they let the Fighting Saints die. Well, that's because they wanted when they were going to merge, they didn't want to have cities that had teams where NHL teams already existed. But at first, I think maybe they wanted that. I mean, I guess I don't know that for a fact, but it seems like a lot of the franchises were in cities that already had some.
Yeah,
so.
That's always a curious thing, and basically that not just unique to hockey and all the challenger leagues and stuff.
Right.
It still plays out in things like the XFL version 3.0 and 2.0 and 1.0. Certainly the USFL 2.0 and all these others. I mean, it's like, do you and it's a balance, right? Because
right.
At the same time, you want to be sort of taken seriously. You need to have some exposure in some of the major metropolitan areas, which usually means having direct or indirect competition against the man, so to speak, yet with a fledgling new franchise, right? And then trying to battle it out. Or you try to find an untilled market that, like MLS, right? Going to Nashville and going to Charlotte and going to Orlando, right? These are the logical places because they only have maybe only one pro team or two tops, right? Austin. So, but it's that balance, right? And the weird thing, and I'm pretty certain that the WHA experienced this from day one or day -1, is it's hard to do both at the same time.
Well, and too, it probably came down to money. I was just kind of sitting here thinking about it while you were saying that, but I'm going to be honest. I think it probably came down to, all right, who's going to give us enough money to have a franchise? So I think that might have played a little major part in it as well.
All right. So who was the sucker? I mean, the person who was really interested in ponying up the dough for, in all the nicest manners of the word, the hustling bunch of merry men behind the WHA, Gary Davidson, and of course our pal Dennis Murphy. Who's stepping up and saying, "I want in Minnesota"?
Well, I think the guy's name was Lewis Kaplan. They had owned like the St. Paul Saints minor league team in the 50s and 60s, and they were the guys that were kind of interested right away. And the group expanded. I mean, I can't remember. I'm trying to scroll through my manuscript now to get to all the names here. But
it's not a quiz. It's but
no, it's all right. I want to make sure I have the right information for you too. So,
well, it's as you do that though, it's a reminder that a lot of and not just in the WHA, certainly we saw it in the WFL, and a lot of these sort of Gary Davidson, Dennis Murphy concoctions. There might have been a lead investor. But more often than not, even if there was that, it tended to be kind of a group, a large group of small investors, and oftentimes the decision-making structure suffered because of that sort of spread of ownership stakes.
Yeah, it was Lewis Kaplan. I was right. I think he had, because WHA the first year they named all their trophies after all their board of governors, their first ones, and the Kaplan Trophy was, I think, for the rookie of the year, and he was kind of the lead investor. I mean, there was a couple other guys, Egan and Lean and John Nassif, Bob Caproni. The group kind of grew as before it even started. So it started out with just 3 of them and then expanded.
So give me a sense of what was leading up to their debut. Was there fan interest? Was the St. Paul location enough of a differentiator? Was there a fear that maybe there was plenty to go around just with the one franchise that was only 5 years old in the NHL, or there was unsatiated appetite for more?
Well, a couple things for Minnesota, at that time in the NHL, there was probably like 20 U.S. born players in the entire league. That first Fighting Saints team had 13, not only American born players, but Minnesotans. So that kind of appealed to local fans. And the Fighting Saints too were, they were a little bit, I don't want to say it. The North Stars, some people considered the North Stars date night, whereas the Fighting Saints were a little bit more people who wanted to see hockey. They didn't want to be seen. They wanted to see hockey, was the quote that somebody had said. But yeah, that first season too, they started, the Civic Center wasn't even finished. So they started in that St. Paul auditorium, which only held about 8,000 fans. And I think the first night they got like 6,000, but after that it started to drop off a little bit. So they were there were definite concerns about attendance. And they knew they would lose money that first season. But they lost more than they thought.
How did they come to market? I mean, like, what was so focusing on local players seems like it's an advantage or a differentiation. How do you, is it St. Paul is different and better and stay in the city, and it's, not, you don't have to drive out to the burbs and this, the vast farmland where these 2 stadiums now are and see was it cheaper tickets? I mean, how do they sort of go to market and differentiate themselves from the 5-year-old franchise across the way?
Oh, they did all kinds of like stick night and puck night, and they had all kinds of promotions, and their tickets were a little bit cheaper. They like I said, they tried to market the Minnesota born players. Glenn Sonmore, was the former Gopher coach, and he was known to be a little bit, I don't want to say it, he was more physical with his style of play and the teams he coached, so they marketed it that way as well. They marketed the new arena coming. That's.
You have on the cover a picture of. Why don't you describe for our audience the cover? Because it's truly a picture that says 1,000 words. I mean, one of which is the dental work of said player, or two, why perhaps that player looks the way he does. And then number three, sort of like, a little bit of the aura of perhaps how the team sort of approached their type of play. A little bit of a sense of all those things.
Well, I was kind of going that way with the Glenn Sonmore thing. Sonmore was a little bit looser with the requirements on how players had to appear. I think at one point he had a quote about, if your hair gets so long that you're tripping over it, well, then you need to get it cut, So he wasn't as concerned as those things, whereas the North Stars had rules about being shaved and having, nice haircuts and things like that. And that kind of led to the Fighting Saints attitude. But yeah, that photo is Mike Walton. And when we were going through the cover photos and things we wanted to do, I had put it out there as like a fan poll. Like, what do you think of these covers? I mean, everybody wanted to see the Carlson brothers on the cover. The original Hanson brothers, the Carlson brothers. But to my knowledge, there is no photo that exists of all three of them in a Fighting Saints jersey. So it would have been like a collage of photos, and it just didn't kind of appear right to me. So we decided we needed to have the logo on the cover, because the logo is one of the greatest logos in all of sports. The other debate was having the unique clear boards from the Civic Center on the cover, because that's one thing that people really appreciated about the Civic Center. But so that was another debate. So that's why if you look on the back cover, we put that picture of the clear boards. But to me, just Mike Walton's toothless grin there, that's the one. I mean, I know some people wanted to see the Carlson brothers on there, and there's plenty of photos of the Carlson brothers in the book. But that Mike Walton photo was the one that spoke to me. So I thought that was the one that needed to be.
All right. So a couple of things to unpack. Tell me about the brothers and maybe sort of the side story of, is it fair? I mean, were they truly the inspiration for the movie?
Not them themselves, but the team. The Carlson brothers, Jack, Jeff, and Steve, they came from Eveleth, Minnesota, northern Minnesota. Apparently they came to try out at one of the Fighting Saints early. Like the Fighting Saints would hold open tryouts just to see if they could, snag a few players that had been overlooked. And at first, Glenn Sonmore didn't think that they were ready. So he told them they needed some minor league hockey experience. So they had traveled around and tried out with some different teams, and they ended up with the Marquette Iron Rangers, I think, that first season or second season that they played. But then they came back in the they came back for the 75 season. They eventually started playing on the team. But in that meantime, they had played with the Johnstown Jets. The Johnstown Jets were the Fighting Saints kind of minor league affiliation. Glenn Sonmore had, I think it's either his father-in-law or somebody he was related to was one of the team's general managers. So he kind of affiliated with them, and a lot of the WHA teams affiliated with some of the teams in that league, that Eastern Hockey League. And the Johnstown Jets, as you probably know, most minor league teams during that time, the Broad Street Bullies out of Philadelphia kind of had this model of, being physical and tough, and they set that blueprint. So all the NHL teams and WHA teams wanted their minor league players to be tough, and these players had to kind of fight their way up the ranks, so to speak, to get noticed and show that they could handle that physical kind of play. And this Johnstown Jets team, that first year they were the Fighting Saints affiliate, they racked up the penalty minutes and they won their league championship. And I mean, all the stories you see in that movie, because one of the players, Ned Dowd, was his sister Nancy is the one who's famous for writing the script. Well, one night while they're winning and celebrating, he apparently called her while they were all partying and said, it sounds like our team is folding. She's like, how could you be folding if you're winning? And she's like, who's your team's owner? Have you talked to him? And he had no idea who owned the team. So she thought that was just the strangest thing in the world. So she came to Johnstown and started following these guys around and recording their conversations and learning a lot about minor league hockey and learning these players like, Bruce Boudreau and the Carlson brothers and Dave Hansen and seeing all this wild craziness. And that's where the stories all came from, was this minor league team in Johnstown.
Very interesting. So I guess the sort of the question sort of embedded in there, did they essentially, and we can talk about this, include the second version, which we'll get to as well. Did they sort of, play up to this name Fightin' Saints, or were they just as goony and or wild and offensive minded as any other WHA team?
Well, they made the playoffs. I mean, so they existed for 5 seasons and they only played 3 complete seasons. They folded twice. You allude to the second incarnation of the team, but the 3 years that they made made it through the entire season, they made the playoffs all 3 years. The first year they got eliminated by Bobby Hull and the Winnipeg Jets. Kind of an interesting little story there is that at the end of that first season, they had tied with the Edmonton Oilers, or Alberta Oilers, I should say. They were the Alberta Oilers that season. And the WHA hadn't worked out any tiebreaker rules at the time. And the Fighting Saints just thought it would be like head-to-head record. And so they just assumed they were done. And apparently the WHA decided to have like like the Major League Baseball has the game 163. They decided to have one more game and let the Oilers and the Fighting Saints play it out. And Harry Neal had to go chase players down at the airport. They were already heading home and they had to come back and they played the Oilers and won the play-in game and got to play the Jets. The second season, they had a lot more scoring punch because of the addition of Mike Walton. But they ended up playing, I'm blanking right now. I think it was the Oilers again. I think they played the Oilers.
Correct. In the quarterfinals, the Oilers,
yep,
and then lost the semis to the Arrows. So Houston.
Yep. And then they went to the Arrows, and that Houston series is one of the most infamous series in all of WHA hockey. I have a whole chapter about it that I titled "Keep Your Gun Belt Tight." That's a line credited to Bill Walton, who said that on local radio here in Minnesota. When you go to Houston, you got to, keep your gun belt tight, and just all kinds of craziness and brawls and fan fights and just it's infamous that season. But they did get eliminated by the Arrows on a how do I say it, a controversial goal at the end. Lefty likes to tell this story because it happened to him. He thought he had covered the puck and thought the ref didn't blow the whistle quick enough, and it got somebody swatted at it and it went in, and that turned out to be the series ending goal. Well, Lefty went to plead his case with the referee and ended up tackling him, and he didn't realize it. One of the other players had to come up to him and say, "Lefty, you're on top of the referee. You got to get up. This doesn't look good." He kind of realized where he was and got up, and he ended up getting suspended the next season for it. And he said he called the referee later that summer to apologize, but told him he was still wrong about the call. And then the third season is another one where they advanced a couple rounds. They ended up playing the Whalers in a crazy series, again, with lots more brawls. Jack Carlson versus Nick Fotiu, and not only a brawls among teams or in between teams. There was a famous incident where Gord Gallant, Machine Gun Gallant, had stayed out a little bit late past curfew, and Harry Neal did a check-in and said, have Gallant call me when he gets in, and Gallant wasn't real happy because he felt there was a little bit of favoritism between Harry Neal and some of the other players, and Gallant went to go talk to Harry Neal in the middle of the night, and he ended up getting into a fight with Harry Neal and the assistant coach, Jack McCartan. And Harry Neal ended up getting tossed out into the lobby of his hotel room in his underwear, locked out in the middle of the night. Like he coached the next day. I think it was game 2 of that Whalers series with like a black eye. He had his nose ligaments in his nose torn, and that's one of the regrets I have in the book, is not finding a photo of that. It was an AP photo, and I couldn't find a photo of Harry Neal's face the next day.
Well, I guess the question though, it bears repeating. Were they worse at mixing it up than any other team, and their name just sort of hinted at it, or were they just kind of, was it typical from what you could tell of WHA play, fast and maybe a little loose sometimes with the action, including with the fists?
I think so. And I think the Fighting Saints were one of the tougher teams around. I mean, Lefty likes to say if they played the Broad Street Bullies, they may beat us in the score, but we'd have beaten them in the fights. And he kind of says that proudly. But yeah, I mean, the whole league was just a little bit more wilder that way in terms of fighting and yeah.
Well, tell me about, so let's back up now. Tell me about the arena and some of the great pictures in this book, which really show, which I think is fascinating. Very, very few arenas over the years have utilized a dasher board setup. I can think of maybe the Rosemont Horizon in more modern terms, back before it became the Allstate Arena here in the metropolitan Chicago area, that had plexiglass clear dashboards, right, where literally you could see. Yeah. It's a fascinating look, right? And it's a little jarring because you're so used to seeing, all white and stuff. And I'm assuming that is by and large because the puck, at least historically, not the first year of the WHA, of course, when they tried and experimented with orange pucks, but pucks are
blue
black.
Too. They had blue pucks too. Yeah.
Blue pucks too, right? But black, right? So it's an easier contrast with the white of the ice, but also the white as it's lifting off the ice against the boards and stuff. Is there anything to? So why the clear plexiglass instead of dasher boards? Was it just a design thing to be different, or was it out of necessity because of the seating arrangement, or what?
From what I understand, they wanted the people in like the lower seats to be able to see the puck when it went into the corner or went up against the boards. And it was just a visual thing from what I understand. I mean, yeah, they wanted to be a little bit different and make the Civic Center more unique as opposed to what, the people kind of make. I mean, I love the Met Center. I spent a lot of time there as a kid, but sometimes people look at the Met Center and think of it like a barn. They do. They say that. But I love the Met Center. Anybody listen to this, don't email me about that. But they wanted the Civic Center to be a little bit more unique. And I think it was just more of a visual thing. The photos themselves, this is kind of a fun little part of this too. I'd already mentioned I got to meet Mike Lamy, the former PR guy. He was sitting on a treasure trove of all the team's original PR photos. We're not even done going through them yet. I mean, over 3,000 of the team's original photos of Goldthorpe, the Carlson Brothers, all these players from the 70s. And I was like a kid in a candy store. So, I think I have like 74 photos in there right now. And, it was really hard to kind of, 70s photography, trying to get them to pop in the book and on those pages. So I really obsessed over the colors on them and how dark they were. And, but yeah, I had to like eliminate some photos, it's like, this is a good photo. This is a good photo. And you're worrying about page count and all these things. So yeah, but just so many really, really fun photos.
Well, you've got a couple of great pictures on, I think it's page 49 from the 1974 WHA All-Star game. And there's a great color where you can see the ref and the sort of the zebra red, white striped thing. And there's also one who's wearing a black one too. I don't know why the referees were different colors.
Yeah, and that's one of the ones I had to cut because there was another one where they were all lined up for the national anthem. And that was kind of a cool one too. So there was, you just, you're like, God, this is a good photo too. You could have a whole photo book of the WHA, maybe if we do another version, we can add some more. But
well, it's interesting, and I'm a passing hockey fan, right? And I have enough experience and interest in it, but not sort of diehard. But it's curious to me why more teams in history and maybe even now don't even consider and I'm sure from the the advertising boards and that kind of stuff, but from an in arena experience, why the clear plexiglass isn't used more often, because it truly makes everybody more into the game, because they can see literally everything without having to worry about not seeing something.
Well, that's the reason they eventually, so after the Fighting Saints left, the hockey arena was used mostly for high school hockey tournaments and things like that, and concerts. But eventually a minor league team, the Minnesota Moose, kind of took residence in there, and that they were, I hate to kind of accuse them here, but they were the ones that got rid of the clear boards, and it was because of advertising. They needed to put advertising on. So it all came down to the mighty dollar was the death of the clear dasher boards.
Well, I mean, the fact that the league gave or brought the All-Star game to Minnesota so quickly, it probably is evidence that Minnesota, by contrast to some of the other teams in the league, was doing pretty well, and maybe was essentially being rewarded so early in the league's existence with that All-Star game.
Well, I guess I don't know this for a fact, but I'm trying to think how many other of the WHA arenas were like new arenas, or were they playing in already previously existing arenas? Like I'm thinking that San Diego arena with the chain link fence. They didn't even have glass, plexiglass. They had a chain link fence. So I'm just kind of wondering if maybe the reason was not only because Minnesota, one of the original franchises, but also just because it was a brand new arena, because it had opened halfway through the Fighting Saints' first season.
Yeah, I think maybe Market Square Arena in Indy, because of both the ABA with the Pacers and the Racers. Right. That might have been one. Yeah, I'd have to struggle. Certainly not Chicago.
Yeah, no. And I think the Crusaders, I don't think they might have had a new one. Was it the Richfield Coliseum?
Coliseum after a while, yeah. But I guess in terms of showcase, right? But it's also interesting too. I think both in your writing and some other research that I did. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first ever broadcast national televised game of the WHA was a game in St. Paul on CBS with Dick Stockton of all people.
It was, and the Fighting Saints lost. I think it was the Winnipeg Jets they played, and it was like, one of the few games that the Fighting Saints actually had. And that's kind of another thing that kind of killed the Fighting Saints was a TV contract. They really didn't have one. I mean, they had a radio presence, but the North Stars had a TV contract. So, I mean, that helped them out a little bit more in terms of the pocketbook. But the Fighting Saints had a contract with a local station to broadcast like 11 games per year, and like a couple times where they canceled it because of technical difficulties. And then the times that they were on TV, they lost. They called it their TV jinx. So that lack of TV exposure really hurt the team as well.
Yeah, the January 7th, 1973. And boy, to be able to find a copy of that game, does such a thing exist? Did you try to find out? Does anybody think they might know? Possibly?
I've contacted some of our local TV stations, and even about old North Stars footage. How do I get my hands on that? They all think it's gone. Sadly, I mean, you'd have reels and reels of these things. They bailed them out years ago.
Or any of the local broadcasts, where any of those.
No, that's the ones I'm looking for, is the local ones.
I see. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and they're gone. They just threw them out, and it's like, oh.
Well, tell me the crowd, the atmosphere. I mean, did they were they? It seems like they were pretty well attended. They were, I think, higher than average.
They were one of the highest in the league.
And to what? I mean, they obviously did pretty well. I mean, they were always above 500, and they were playoff caliber just about every year of their existence.
Well, I mean, the crowds, I think I found a quote somewhere that said, the North Stars were, and we kind of briefly mentioned it earlier, the North Stars, they were dressed up for date night, whereas the Saints fans were wearing what they called Sears best. They were, a little bit more blue collar. They were very much more, whereas, Ren Blair, the old North Stars coach and general manager, had to turn around and tell the fans, hey, you need to boo them right now. The Saints fans didn't have, they didn't need to be coached. They were very, very vocal, very, very involved in the game. So it was a very, very different crowd than at the Met Center. But yeah, I mean, even though the Fighting Saints attendance they needed to make 11,000 every year to stay afloat financially. And I think the first year they averaged 6,000, the second year it was 8,000. And they never really reached that goal of an average of 11,000. I mean, they had a few games here and there where they kind of blew the roof off the place. But even though they were one of the most highly attended arenas in the league, the league kind of just let them die off,
Well, why the high attendance number as their benchmark? What did they have a larger than normal budget? Lord knows the WHA was not very centralized in their approach to what a good budget should be. It's very franchise oriented, and people could spend and clearly there was overspending to get some top talented players and stuff. I suspect the Fighting Saints had more than their fair share of pricey players, but did that aid and abet their inability to kind of cover their costs with 11,000 people on average?
I think so. I mean, there was you talk to any player from the Fighting Saints, they'll tell you the line of, we had to go cash our checks before Mike Walton did, otherwise ours would bounce, because Walton was the big money player. So they all had to try to get to the bank before he did. When Wayne Belisle took over the team too, it seemed he had a little bit of a shell game going. To get the loans from the banks, he would have to show the receipts. Well, he was showing the receipts to multiple banks, and eventually, though, it just, you're looking at this live golf right now, where they're throwing money around to all these players, and it was very similar then, but it's going to come crashing down at some point. I don't live golf will. I mean, with the Saudis backing them, they'll probably have enough money, but with the WHA, it was a shell game. They were throwing so much money around at all these players. It just wasn't sustainable. It was a house of cards, All
right. Well, you mentioned Walton. Tell me about his story, Mike Walton, because he's clearly, I guess he was the first sort of big signing for the Fighting Saints, and immediately became a force in the WHA because he kind of just racked up the goals.
Yeah, that first season, the Fighting Saints kind of lacked scoring punch. They didn't have any. They were kind of, I think, 11th out of 12th in scoring in the league. So that second season, they went after Walton, and they signed him and his brother Rob. And Walton, they called him Shaky. Some attribute it to his father having the same nickname, who apparently would give a head fake when he would try to make a move and go around somebody. But most people refer to it as Walton being he was, how do I put it politely? He was there some nights and not others. But apparently, according to the coaches, he could, when he was there and the switch was on, nobody could stop it, and he had a lot of erratic behavior. There's stories of him jumping into a pool with his hockey equipment on and almost drowning. There's stories of him getting into fights with players on our own team. He was everything the WHA represented in terms of hockey and just wild, just crazy, erratic behavior and chaos. And that first season he played with the Fighting Saints, he actually led the league in scoring. He had, 111 points, if I remember right, 60 goals and 50 some assists. And he actually outscored Gordie Howe that year. And even though Gordie Howe was given the MVP and the MVP trophy was named after him, that season, Mike Walton actually outscored him, and obviously it was given to Gordy probably because they were the ones to knock us out of the playoffs that year. And I think they went on to win the Avco Cup that year too. But just kind of interesting that Walton had outscored him that year and was the league's leading scorer.
Yeah. Also interesting that he played for Team Canada in the second of the Summit Series in 1974, which of course 72, the sort of breakthrough one where the Canadians beat the then Soviet Union team in the classic and epic series that no WHA players were allowed to play to represent Canada. That was a whole thing. You wonder if he had been part of that team prior, if that would have even made even more of a difference for Canada's side. But that's armchair quarterbacking, I guess.
Right.
So give me a sense now of how, so it sounds like they're competitive, right? The team on the ice, in the market. I'm sure if you're a pro hockey fan in the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin Cities metropolitan area, you're loving life because you've got two of, the top teams in what is now just a plethora of hockey franchises. Now we've talked about sort of the NHL expansion in those years and the Kansas City Scouts and the Washington Capitals and, the thinning of the ranks already. I mean, it's like, they were trying to catch up for all those years of lost expansion. And then voila, the WHA shows up. All of a sudden you've got more teams than perhaps the talent pool can stock across North America.
Well, and don't forget too, we had the Gophers who were winning college championships here. So, and maybe not nationally as popular, but in Minnesota here, the Gopher hockey team was also, so they were not only competing with the North Stars, they were competing with the Gophers as well.
So give me a sense then of how the wheels start to fall off of this thing. Because it seems by all accounts, by WHA standards, which is arguably not saying much, team is doing pretty well, but I guess the reality caught up with them pretty quickly, not a few seasons into their journey.
Yeah, I mean, it just all came down to attendance. I mean, if you're not, I had somebody tell me once, hockey's a butts and seats business, and if you don't have butts and seats, you're not going to stay afloat, and it just really is all it came down to. And like I said, with Wayne Belisle trying to, kind of run that shell game a little bit, it was just bound to collapse,
Well, yeah. And I think it's also important to remember for, people a generation or two behind us here on this or in front of us here is that, I mean, it historically hockey has been very much of an attendance driven. Now, obviously things have changed in the last number of years with television and media rights and all the ancillary revenue streams. Right. But back then, hockey didn't have the national television presence, shall we say, part of that because of the NHL taking so long to recognize that there was this thing called the West Coast or places outside the Northeast and the Midwest. Right. It didn't help their case for television markets. Right. And that was, most of the other leagues by that point had kind of figured that out and at least had broken ground on, another revenue stream beyond just what's the attendance today.
Well, and two, you talk about the TV stuff, but also, a lot of the times the North Stars or the Fighting Saints were playing, they had scheduled a lot of games on the same nights as the North Stars or the nights the North Stars were away and there was a TV thing. So they just kind of poorly planned that out and didn't think that through to kind of maximize their attendance and their profits. So I mean, just again, going back to that competition and lack of TV presence themselves, just kind of all accumulated and eventually took them down.
Well, they went down though, and this is I guess is a fairly common occurrence, but 1976, 1977 season.
Yep.
And you kind of, I'm sorry, it was 76.
Yep.
Give me a sense of like how this team comes to an end. There's both the sort of like the buildup, right, which we're kind of hinting at, but maybe also the specifics of how and when it happened, because it seemed to look, it took a lot of people by surprise, although in retrospect, it probably shouldn't have. And I'm talking the first version.
The first version. So there were kind of signs of it. The the summer before the season even started. Like, I think Belial had said that, he'd bought out the rest of the investors. And his group was now he was in charge, solely in charge. There weren't, he'd bought everybody out, which, and everything was fine. And they had caught up on their payments and things like that. And he was trying to paint a rosier picture than it actually was. And he kind of told people, he said, if you hear we miss a payment, it's not true. Well, it was. And even some of the players' agents were getting wind of play. Like, they had signed Henry Boucher from the North Stars heading into that season. And Boucher was promised a bunch of money, and he not never got it, but he hadn't gotten it. So some of the agents from these players, from Walton and Henry Boucher, started reaching out to the North Stars, looking to see, first of all, Boucher, they were seeing who owned his NHL rights to try to get him, over to playing with the NHL, and the North Stars eventually traded his rights to the Scouts. But Walton's agent was inquiring about, jumping ship and going back to the NHL. And it came down to New Year's Eve. They missed their first payroll. And
this is New Year's Eve, 1975.
1975, yes, heading into 76. The players held a meeting, and they decided they were going to keep playing without pay, because there were lots of promises made and things were going to happen and it would all be fixed, and we were going to get a loan from the Teamsters, which is one of my favorite parts of the story.
Well, okay, wait a minute. Let's stop right there. What?
So they thought they were going to get a loan from the Teamsters. And I mean, if you watch as much movies as I do and mafia type stuff, the Teamsters and so they were looking into being owned by the Teamsters, and the Teamsters local president made like a quote in the paper that said, the Teamsters get enough crap for taking on blue chip businesses. We're not going to take on, financial losers. And so they thought they had all these promises being made to them. That was just one of the funnier ones. And
well, security wouldn't have been a problem, that's for sure.
I find that part of the story hilarious. The guy's name was Marzatelli or Tony Felicetta. What I mean, not to be stereotypical there, but that was the Teamsters president name.
Sounds right out of Central Casting.
Right, exactly. But the players, were made promises, and they decided to keep playing. And they did. And here, one of the beautiest parts of the story is they were winning, and they were playing while the walls were literally crashing around them. They were winning, and they were, fighting it out at the top of the Western Conference. And then, there was other teams folding around them. So they had to add more games and add more travel budget, away games, which further just kind of piling on. And it got into there was I can't remember where it was at, but there was maybe it was in Cincinnati, where they had told the media that if they weren't paid by that day, they weren't going to play. And Harry Neal decided to play a little trick on the fans and kept the team in the locker room for warmups. And the refs came in and like, "Are you guys going to come out?" And Harry's like, "Hey, we got mortgages to worry about here. We're not. So everybody thought they weren't going to, but they did eventually come out and play that game. But they told them, if we don't get a check, we're not getting on the plane go to this trip out west. And Wayne Belial found a way to get them a check. It wasn't the one they missed from December or New Year's Eve, but they did get a check. They got on the plane. They headed out west. They came back home. And it was, I think, February 28th. They were playing the Mariners at home. I think it was the Mariners.
Yes, correct.
They like a couple of the big players' agents told them, just don't show up. Don't go. Like Mike Walton didn't show. John Garrett. I have a photo in the book of John Garrett loading up his car at the Civic Center. Paul Holmgren was told not to go. They had to call up some, Johnstown players. Assistant coach Jack McCartan had to suit up and be the backup goalie that night. And then the next day they were scheduled to get on a plane to head to Cincinnati. And they showed up at the airport, and it sounds like there was only a handful of players there. And Glenn Sonmore and Wayne Belisle got some money at the last minute from a investor, another mysterious investor, and we're like stuffing bags of cash for the players for their per diem and stuff, and trying to fill them up. And they got to the airport, and then the 8 or 9 players that were there pretty much said, you know what, we're done, and they folded the team.
How did they do that sort of hand to mouth for 2 months, right? Literally maybe getting one check along the way and all the uncertainties and stuff. I mean,
it sounded like they got a couple checks in there. It was the one that was missed on New Year's Eve. They never got back.
Yeah, but were they delusional, the players, or were they loyal and enjoying the process of winning and being competitive to a fault? Or you gotta pay the rent and feed the kids, right? I mean,
right.
2 months without really getting paid.
Honestly, I think for a lot of them, you got to remember these WHA guys, other than the 3-4 big name guys, I think, they wanted to play. They wouldn't maybe not have those opportunities in the NHL. That's one of the legacies of the WHA is that it created more opportunities for these guys. And, I guess I can't speak for what they were thinking, but in my mind, I mean, do I want to go work in a construction site, or do I want to keep playing hockey, and maybe get noticed, and maybe, I don't know, I'm just speculating. But for me, as a, somebody who's played sports in my lifetime, I want to play.
Yeah. And they and the interesting and convoluted sojourn of the Denver Spurs / Ottawa Civics.
Yeah. That was the one I was talking about that collapsed. When they got added games. That was the one I was referring to.
So those two teams didn't make it, but a pretty good sense of sort of like how, you're only as strong as your weakest link in the WHA. All right, before we sort of get to the end of that chapter and then the bizarre, maybe, reincarnation second chapter, how much, from what you could tell, and if you're doing this chronologically and doing some digging, how much did the fan base and the local media, and maybe even the national hockey media, know and or question or worry about the health of the Fighting Saints? Or was it kind of a surprise and a shock on New Year's Day and the New Year's Eve and that 2 months later thing? Were people in on the fact that things were going sideways before then?
Yeah, I don't think it was a surprise. I think even from the beginning, people were questioning having 2 major pro hockey teams in the same city. And I mean, even after the first season, there were rumors of the team moving to Detroit, or rumors of the team moving out west to the Pacific Northwest. And I mean, it seemed like every day there was rumors that there would be a new buyer, or we've got another offer here, or we're going to go there. And that's why I keep referring to it as a shell game. It was just every day there was some new rumor. I don't think the collapse was a surprise to anyone.
Okay, well then the team goes away mid-season, bitter taste in everybody's mouth. Okay, so tell me what happens next, because one in this historical story wakes up and all of a sudden sees the Minnesota Fighting Saints back in the league the next season. Tell us what that is and how that comes about, because you just described a situation, frankly, that would seem to question why they would want to try that all over again.
Right. Well, so this goes back to our conversation about the California Golden Seals. So at that, or actually before that time, the Seals had been owned by the NHL. The NHL was trying to keep them afloat, and kind of didn't want to be losing franchises when they were facing competition from the WHA. And I think the guy's name was Melvin Swig. He bought the Seals. And a couple of his partners were the Gunn brothers. I mean, we'll get to them in a second here, but he bought the team, and he had planned to build this. It was called the Yerba Buena Center. It was going to be like a convention center with an arena attached, and he wanted to own the arena, and which again is one of the things that kills most teams, is that they have to pay rent, at an arena, especially for the North Stars, who built their own and then had to pay rent. And anyways, kind of getting off tangent there, but he wanted to build this Yerba Buena Center, and he had originally been told he could go ahead with it. Well, there was a mayoral election in San Francisco, the famous Mayor Moscone, and he had promised that if he got elected, he would had a blue ribbon committee to look at the plans and kind of, look at them a little closer. And he did get elected, and he did kind of hold off and tell Swig he couldn't build his Yerba Buena Center. And eventually Swig kind of got mad, and the NHL gave him permission to move. Well, because his partners were the Gunn brothers, who were from Cleveland, they actually looked in Denver first. I think they were going to move there, but then the Gunn brothers persuaded Swig to take a look at Cleveland. So they moved to Cleveland and became the Cleveland Barons. Well, at that point, kind of at that exact same time, the Nick Maletti, the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Crusaders, too many Cleveland teams here. The Crusaders, which was the WHA team, they had been having financial difficulties as well. And they were looking into moving to Florida. They had a logo design. They were going to be the Florida Breakers. And they had already hired, ironically, Glenn Sonmore as their GM, who had been kind of recruiting some of the old Fighting Saints players. Well, somewhere along the line, the Florida deal fell through, and Maletti didn't want to stay in Cleveland anymore because the Barons, the NHL, was going to be there, and they didn't want to face that competition. So they began looking elsewhere to move. And lo and behold, they were recruited by sounds like Wayne Belisle and the mayor of St. Paul to come and take a look here. And so they decided after, well, I should say this too, there were part of the negotiations were that Maletti wanted guaranteed season tickets sold from the local Chamber of Commerce. And one of my things in my research that I struggled to find was the actual number. Like one says it was 4,000, one says it was 2,000, one says it was 5,000. But the agreed upon number seems like neither side agreed on the agreed upon number. Like, no, we said we'd only buy this many. Well, no, you said you'd buy this many. And that became a sticking point later on. But yeah, they decided to move to St. Paul. And they called themselves the New Fighting Saints. They got the same logo, but the jerseys, instead of blue and yellow, were now red and yellow. And Glenn Sonmore, once they came here, he started putting the team back together. He literally he brought back in, I mean, other than Walton and Henry Boucher and Paul Holmgren, he literally put the rest of the same team back together through trades and interleague drafts, and just got the Carlson brothers back, Dave Hansen back, Gord Gallant back, and Lefty Curran back, and so I titled the chapter "Putting the Band Back Together" because it reminded me of the Blues Brothers movie, just getting everybody back together.
So okay, so how does that go then? I mean, I know how it goes, but
right.
Tell our audience how that goes, because okay, so I guess if I'm not mistaken, this now by this year is now the only market left that has a team in both leagues, competing against each other.
Yep. And that's again I think one of the reasons that the WHA let them die. But I mean, it doesn't go well. Part of the reason is that the old Fighting Saints team still had some debts with banks, and those banks tried to go after the new Fighting Saints and try to recoup some of those funds. I already kind of alluded to that, the ticket guarantee, which was clearly not agreed upon in any writing somewhere. But that was a big sticking point. And and they faced the same attendance issues. I mean, it was the exact same situation all over again.
Now, historically, right, is this what we call sort of a retcon situation, a retro continuation kind of thing? Or, I mean, some might argue that, right? So, I mean, we're really splitting hairs here when we're talking about one or two teams in a league that hasn't existed for, almost 50 years. Where does that history lie, right? But, in many cases that you could say that these were two separate franchises, and on many planes of thought, they were, right? But yet they were embracing the same name and for all intents and purposes, largely the same logo, and trying to literally continue, albeit a new franchise, but in the same place, same, uniform kind of construct, the same, the name, so the curiosity there. So I'm just bringing this up years after the fact. How do you think the fans and the press and the media feel about it there? Because, they kind of were just, they had the rug pulled out of them from them, last year, right? And now all of a sudden they have to suspend disbelief and buy in for a new quote unquote scenario this year.
Well, like I said, I wasn't alive back then, so I don't know how people took it then. I think now most people consider them the same franchise, even though they weren't. Like, fans like to collect both jerseys, and here's my red version of this. And, I know the guy, one of the people I work with from Vintage Minnesota Hockey, we view them as the same franchise. I mean, it was really same players, same place, other than a few. I find it weird that when I have to go to Hockey Reference and look up that second incarnation, they're under the Cleveland Crusaders. That seems odd to me. But again, I wasn't born back then, so maybe I don't know. I guess I don't know how people would have taken it back then.
Yeah, and it's easy to say people don't care, and then maybe they don't. I do though, because it's these are real teams with real people and real fans paying real money for real entertainment and games, right? And at the time they were real. And I guess it's convenient because the league is dead, and it was such, the second version was such a short period of time. They played 4 years as the Cleveland Crusaders. So sure, it seems like that's where they should live, but it's just a curiosity to me right now. It's a lot more interesting and frankly important when the teams still live on, right? So the North Stars becoming the Dallas Stars, right? We've had a very hot debate on a number of different conversations about where the history of the Minnesota North Stars should live. Is it in many, some say the Stars, some say it's in San Jose, right?
Well, I think you know where I'm going to go with that.
Well, no, I don't.
Yeah, I don't. Our banners should be here. The North Stars banner should be here,
or with the Wild, right?
Here, I know. I've interviewed Lou Nanny. He thinks our team, the Wild, should be named the North Stars. Bill Masterton's, it should be here in Minnesota at the XL. It shouldn't be down in Dallas.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be said for that, right? But continuation.
Clearly, I'm biased.
Well, no, I don't want to sort of digress here from this story, but okay. So let me just
that's fine.
Inconveniently ask this question then. So where then do you think this cul-de-sac of history of the Minnesota Fighting Saints, both teams, right? If we're going to consider them, we're going to squint really hard and consider them sort of one experience in history, which is fine. Where does that history live? Or has there been any recognition, admission by anybody in the minors or the Wild now in the NHL of this franchise?
Well, I think the Wild has had a few of the players back. That at the beginning of the games, they have the Let's Play Hockey. I don't know if you know how much you know about the Minnesota Wild. We used to have the show called Let's Play Hockey, and the tagline was Let's Play Hockey. So when the Wild started, before every game, they have some, local celebrity, famous person come and do the Let's Play Hockey before the game. And they've had quite a few of the Fighting Saints players come back and do that. Although I don't know that they've, I know in the early 90s, there was, there's been reunions. The St. Paul Saints baseball team they've had some Fighting Saints nights. They've had the Hanson brothers come and, do their bit, and all the players come back for a reunion. But yeah, I mean, I've actually kind of been trying to reach out to the Wild, because I mean, the XL Energy Center is built on the grave of the Civic Center. The Wild's offices are the same exact offices where the Fighting Saints offices were, and where Bobby Hull signed his famous contract. And I wish the Wild would possibly, hopefully recognize them this year on the 50th anniversary, especially with, like I, said about all those Minnesotans in that first season that kind of were pioneering that league to get it off the ground. I'm not saying the Wild haven't done anything, so don't take it that way, but I don't care if I make money on this book. What I want is that these guys get some recognition, and we've got like Steve Carlson is fighting cancer right now. I've heard Gord Gallant is battling cancer. Wayne Belisle we think he's in hospice. Like, the family asked us not to kind of reach out to him and kind of give them their space right now. So, I mean, you got these players. It's the 50th anniversary of the team. You're literally playing on their grave of the team. I hope the Wild will do something to honor them this year for the 50th anniversary.
Give me some other names that people might remember, either from what happened to them afterwards, or just in the annals of Saints history. Some of the names you've mentioned, but
Mike Antonovich.
Sure, we mentioned Slapshot with Ogie Oglethorpe played. Well,
that was Goldthorpe. That was Bill Goldthorpe. Mike
Goldthorpe,
Antonovich.
Right.
Yeah, no worries. Mike Antonovich was a Minnesota boy from I'm gonna mispronounce this, Calumet, Minnesota. People really, he played for the Gophers. He played for Sonmore. So people, they wanted to see pictures of him in the book, and so I had a few pictures of him in there. You got Bruce Boudreau, obviously, who was the Wild coach for a while. Why am I blanking right now? Gary Gambucci was a Minnesota guy. Fran Huck, Pat Westrom, another Minnesota guy. It was important to me to have photos of the Minnesota guys in the book, because I feel like the book's going to appeal mostly to Minnesota people. I'm hoping it gets picked up, because you got the 50th anniversary of the movie coming up too. But yeah, Bill Goldthorpe, of course, he was famously depicted as Ogie Oglethorpe in the movie by Ned Dowd, by the way. The Nancy Dowd's brother was the actor who played Ogie. Apparently Ogie was going to be in the film, but he when he was getting interviewed, or not, well, I don't know if you call it an interview, Paul Newman's brother was coming to visit and talk to him, and Goldthorpe allegedly had been thrown out of the game that he was in, and he was really angry in the locker room, and he threw a beer bottle against the wall, or whatever he was drinking, some sort of bottle with fluid in it, against the wall, and it splattered all over Paul Newman's brother's coat on his way into the locker room. And suffice to say, Goldthorpe didn't get another interview. Now, we mentioned Lefty, John Garrett. They called him Cheech because he looked like Cheech Marin, or they called him Cheechy as well. Yeah, that's
a cast of characters for sure.
For sure.
And I think it's awesome that you've gone to such great lengths and depths. What was there stuff in your pursuit of this story and trying to put this all together that you wish you could have gotten, whether it's a person who wasn't reachable or was no longer with us, or sort of a holy grail of either memorabilia or footage, or anything that maybe still out there that you'd love to find, and maybe our audience or other audiences could perhaps help crowdsource for you or pursue?
Well, I had trouble, I think, because, I'm not a media person. You can tell by my not clearest of talking here. I'm not.
You're doing just fine.
I'm not in the media. I'm a 7th grade science teacher, and I talk much better in front of 7th graders than I do on these things. But I think a lot of the players, they were like, "Who is this guy?" So they're kind of afraid to talk to me, and not like, totally understandable. They're like, I'm kind of a nobody, to be honest with you. And, luckily I got Lefty to talk to me, and a couple of the PR guys, and Steve Carlson would communicate with me a little bit on Twitter, and I even got a little couple quotes from Craig Hartsburg. But I mentioned that photo earlier of Harry Neal. I really wanted to get that in the book. The problem with trying to find AP photos from the 70s is they just don't exist. Like most of the photos, the black and white photos that I found at our historical society here in Minnesota from the Star Tribune and Pioneer Press newspapers. But AP photos like that, I don't know if they exist anymore or where you can find originals of them. There's also a famous photo of, at one point, Belial was trying to lure Bobby Orr away from the Bruins. And there's a famous photo, you can Google it right now and you can find it on the internet, where Belial is sitting with Bobby Orr and they're talking contract, but trying to get copyrights to it. I think it's in some Toronto library somewhere. I don't know how I would, so that was one we wanted to try to find as well. Trying to think of other.
And I would imagine too that as this book is out there and sort of permeates and stuff, that people will discover it, and then perhaps you'll be corrected on a few things, or maybe even
for sure
augmented with certain things. So it sounds to me like you're taking a healthy approach, that this is not necessarily, although it's definitive for the first time really in it's the team's history since it was there, is maybe not necessarily the final word.
Right. Well, and I the thing with publishing on Amazon is if I find a mistake, I can just upload the new version and people will, because they print on demand. So I don't have books sitting in my garage and mailing them out. So if we find an error, we can correct it. And I was also kind of thinking too, maybe we do a second edition of this after we find some mistakes, or maybe we get a hold of one of those photos that we want, or, one of the other things this is what I wanted to add. One thing that I'm kind of regret that I didn't put in the book was like a list of all the players who ever played. Like in Lou Nanny's book about the North Stars, he has a section, Bob Shower's book too, I should mention that. They have, a section called They Wore the Star, and just to kind of honor every player who wore a jersey. And, for me, it kind of came down to page count. Every page you put in there it makes the book, and we're already at $20. And that was because we wanted to have color photos in there. And I think that's a little bit high for a book of this size. The book of this size should probably be about $15, in my opinion, but the color photos kind of push it up there. So I was trying to, cut costs. So maybe we do in a future edition, we put, like they wore the Little Saint is what they called it. They wore the Saints jersey, and list all the players in there. And, also the statistics too. Somebody suggested putting, each year's statistics in there, but sometimes when you do a little research on Fighting Saints statistics, it's not there sometimes, So trying to find the accurate ones, I'd be afraid to put something in there just because I got it off Hockey Reference, I'd want to make sure I had accurate ones. But yeah, those are some other things I thought of that I kind of wanted to put in there, but didn't.
Well, no, this is great though. I mean, look, I think this is one of the major reasons why we continue to do this show is we love to find stories about, teams that have been forgotten or departed or vanished and seemingly in thin air. And these things happened. They were real, right? And they were real fans, and they're part of, in this case, the history of professional hockey in this country, and certainly very crucial or central to the pro game's life in your neck of the woods, right? And even though the team is gone, it still has some reverberations for perhaps why there's a team in St. Paul now in the NHL, right? And maybe where those histories kind of lie, and yeah, things like Slapshot and Oglethorpe, and I mean these are all little pieces of diaspora that, or the history of hockey in Cleveland, and maybe why there's not a team in Cleveland now, right? Or perhaps why there is one in Columbus now, right? Oddly has a connection to this story, and as we talked about, right, Dallas existing today and San Jose existing today, and all that stuff, right? Where this history, it's actually part of it. If you just dig a level or two beneath the surface, you'll find that the Fighting Saints are actually part of those stories, plural.
Well, the WHA, we kind of mentioned it earlier, but they were, their legacy is that they created opportunities for more players, specifically more American-born players, because there just weren't that many before the WHA was around. And they also, another thing that's a little known fact about the WHA is they were successful in challenging that reserve clause. That first season, when some of those players were, the NHL was suing the WHA was successful through the courts of challenging their contracts, the reserve clause, where they, were kind of forced to stay with the team even though their contract was up. So that's kind of an unknown little or underrated legacy of the WHA as well.
Well, now, much interestingness there for sure. The book, a must-get. Great pictures. You want to see what the see-through dashboards look like during Minnesota Fighting Saints game. I mean, it's fascinating what that arena looked like in St. Paul. It's called A Slap Shot in Time, the wild but true history of the Minnesota Fighting Saints. It is available in paperback and Kindle forms. And of course, you can find a convenient link to it and Amazon's fulfillment from our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode, number 273 with Dan Whenesota. And you will find not only some great pictures and stuff, but a convenient link to said book. And we will get a couple of shekels of referral love for your doing so, and we appreciate that. Dan will too, believe it or not. You can follow Dan on social media, and I encourage you to do so. You can see him on Instagram or Facebook or on Twitter. They're all the same handle. It's at Whenesota, WHENESOTA, at Whenesota. You can also follow Dan's exploits for his still unveiling, still unspooling, shall we say, amateur documentary devoted to the story of the Minnesota North Stars. Yeah, remember them? We've talked about them in a couple of previous episodes. The Twitter handle for that is at M, as in Mary, North Star State. M North Star State. That's at M North Star State. Follow the movie exploits there. Dan also wants you to keep checking out, and he's a prolific contributor to the VintageMNHockey.com website. That's the Vintage MinnesotaHockey.com website. It's actually VintageMNHockey.com. There you go. Lots and lots and lots of great stuff there. Great photos, that kind of stuff. Including the iconic photography around Bobby Hull entering and acknowledging the WHA. That occurred in St. Paul, as you heard Dan talk about. Those pictures and many, many more and stories all there at VintageMNHockey.com. All right, our website, as previously mentioned, is goodseatsstillavailable.com. You'll find all of our social media links there. We're on Facebook. You'll find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available, and of course on Twitter, where we're probably the most active, at Good Seats Still. Email address is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Please indeed say hello and keep it clean, will you? We have a little weekly email newsletter. Just search the website. You'll find it there. And I think that's it. Jerry Payne, thank you, sir, for your kind work, as always, this week. And, of course, to all of our listeners, we are just humbled and hugely appreciative of all your notes and your suggestions and commentary and all that stuff. Thanks for listening. We can't do this without you, and we encourage you to listen further. Rate and review us, will you, wherever you get podcasts. Subscribe to us, follow us, whatever you need to do. And tell your friends, by all means. Do that, too. We appreciate that. All right, enough from me. See you next week. Thanks for listening. Bye.